Today, I am very excited to have Dr. Mark Gebhardt here to join us and tell us a little bit about what he is doing. Dr. Gebhardt is a clarinetist in the Longwood Symphony and one of the longest standing members of the orchestra. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So Mark, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I grew up in Pennsylvania and went to college in Pennsylvania, medical school in Ohio and Cincinnati, and then ended up in Boston for residency in orthopedics. And I've worked at Mass General and Children's Hospital, and I'm currently the chair of orthopedics at Beth Deaconess Medical Center. And so I practice orthopedic surgery, but with a specialty towards oncology, which means bone tumors, soft tissue tumors, and sometimes those are benign, sometimes malignant, and they occur in kids and adults. So we treat both. So about half my practice is at Children's and half my practice is at Beth Deaconess.
So as a surgeon, what does your day look like now during the pandemic?
Well, it's a lot different. I've mostly been at home, and I've mostly been on Zoom meetings all day long. And in between Zoom meetings or Starleaf meetings, I've been doing emails and trying to catch up, because the administrative task of shifting from a large practice, and I'm speaking of the whole department now, that is largely elective, so total joint replacements and repair of meniscuses in the knee and anterior cruciate ligaments and carpal tunnel and trigger fingers and ankle fractures, all that kind of stuff, changing all that into we're not doing elective surgery anymore was quite a shift. And so I have a whole department of people that are working about 25% or less of their normal capacity. And so that meant having our staff and my chief administrative officer organize a way to contact all these patients that had elective surgery or visits in the clinic and tell them that they're going to be postponed if they could, if it wasn't a dire emergency, for their own safety and because we were dealing with this large influx of COVID positive patients. And so that took a lot of time. You can imagine, hundreds of clinic visits being canceled and operations. And so that occupied the first couple weeks trying to make that transition. Then we had to learn how to do virtual visits, like we now see patients like this Zoom interview. And it actually works quite effectively. It has some challenges. If a patient needs an x-ray or something, you can't do that. And you can't do the same physical exam you would normally do. But for a lot of what we do, we've been able to handle it by doing virtual office visits, either telephonic or visual like this. And now that we're finally starting, so the hospital then had to convert a lot of spaces that are normally used for other things into ICUs. So our recovery areas got turned into ICUs, and we took anesthesia machines from the OR and turned them into respirators for these ICUs. So we're about 150+% more ICU space than we normally do, and fortunately we still had some reserves, so it never got so bad like in New York that we were in real trouble. But it was a redeployment of a lot of people, a lot of machines and equipment. And now as COVID is starting to recede a little bit, or at least not have the same intensity, we're starting to think about how we start things up again. And that's turning out to be even a greater challenge. it would seem you just walk back into work and do your thing. But a lot of the ORs were dismantled. We don't have enough PPE and gowns. So a lot of, and then nursing staff has been redeployed to other areas, as anesthesia and things that we need to do surgery. So it's going to be a slow process, and we probably won't be up to running full strength till later in the summer or fall. So it's been a big change.
Yeah, it makes sense that you know, it's a harder challenge to figure out how to get things back to normal than to do what you're doing currently.
Yeah, I mean, if it'll ever be normal again.
True, that's very true. So Mark, you're also a clarinetist, and you were on the board of the Longwood Symphony for many years. So you've been involved for how many years now?
I think I joined in '86, around that time.
So what has kept you around for so long? Keep coming back to the orchestra?
I just love playing music. You know, when I started playing when I was, I guess, 10 or whenever they give you your first instrument in band. And then I got pretty serious about it in high school and actually thought about going into music for a while. But I didn't want to be a high school band teacher. If I did it, I wanted to be a classical clarinetist playing in an orchestra, and there aren't many positions. And I love medicine. So I actually stopped playing through medical school and residencies, close to 15 years. And then when I got into practice, I realized that something was missing from my life. And it turns out the concertmaster at the time was an orthopedic resident of mine. And he said, well, why don't you come to one of our concerts? So I went to a Longwood Symphony concert in Hancock Hall, of all places. And I said, wow, I didn't realize that this existed. So then I auditioned and was told I needed to start taking lessons before I could get in. So I did, and eventually passed the audition. And I'll never forget my first experience was playing fourth clarinet, which only in Mahler 1, which only plays in the fourth movement, and only about half of that. But I was so excited to be in the middle of the orchestra again, playing music. And so I'm still taking lessons and still trying to improve. And I've loved it. I do chamber music as well. Been involved with Apple Hill Chamber Music Society, or a group for, I guess it's called the Apple Hill Chamber Players, for a number of years, and have gone to workshops up there, or as my wife refers to them, band camp, every summer. And I just love it. And I've been able to then use that during these times. So I'm actually, it's kind of nice, because normally what I do is just practice what I need to for the next concert, and was all set to do that when we realized we weren't going to be able to do the next concert. So now I can just do other things and work on technique and etudes, and so I'm having a good time.
Well, you've certainly come a long way from fourth chair in a Mahler symphony. We recently were featured on WHRB, Harvard Radio, and they rebroadcast the last concert we did before everything shut down on March 7th at Jordan Hall. And we were very prominently featured on Rhapsody in Blue, which has got to be one of the most famous clarinet solos. And I would say that's probably the farthest end of the spectrum you can get from fourth chair and Mahler.
That's right.
So Mark, I am curious what, or I guess how playing music has helped you in your medical career.
Well, it certainly helps your mental status when you've had a rough day. I mean, I deal with cancer patients and children, and it can be quite stressful, quite emotional, and being able to, I don't know, express or diffuse that emotional stress into music, or even if I'm just listening to music, it helps heal me, and I think it helps me deal with patients that have pretty serious problems. It gives you compassion and empathy. I mean, you can't help when you listen to a great piece of music of, feeling the emotion, and you can somehow translate that into how you care for patients, I think. So it's, I think, been very important in my life to be able to keep some balance. I used to joke that I would say that music kept me sane, except that anybody that knew me well would say that didn't work.
Well, I certainly think it's doing a good job considering everything that you've accomplished. And kind of jumping back to your orthopedic career, you were our gala honoree this past year in 2019, and I'm still relatively new to the orchestra, so it was, I think, the best way to get to know someone in the orchestra is to plan an event where everyone they love and who loves them is in a room together.
That was a special night, a great honor for me.
We were, of course, very pleased to honor you, and one of the things that stuck out to me is your work with the Ruth Jackson Orthopedic Society.
Yeah, it's orthopedics is not a female dominant specialty by any means, and it's pretty much of an old boys club, and is very slowly come out of the dark ages to allow women in, and there's been a lot of resistance. And this is a society that was started, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago by the first board certified orthopedic surgeon who was a woman, and it's meant to help women in orthopedics with the issues that they face when they go through training or when they're in practice. And so a number of years ago, I joined, and it was interesting to hear their concerns and sort of view it. I'll never forget the first time I walked into one of their meetings. So there's this room filled with women, and I was like one of the only guys in the place, and it immediately gives you a sense of what their challenge is, and it's grown and become popular. So they elected me as the first male member of their board, which was quite fun. So I just rotated off that. I was on their board for 2 years, and it was an interesting experience to try to help them. And we're gradually getting there. Our residency takes quite a few women. I have a number of women as faculty, and the percentage in orthopedics is starting to go up, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. And Mark, you're also involved with the PanMass Challenge,
Mm-hmm.
which is, if you can tell us what that is.
Well, it was started by a guy, I don't know, 35 years ago, 30 some years ago, who lost his mother to cancer, and a bunch of his buddies decided they'd ride across Massachusetts to raise money, and they raised $10,000 the first year, and went to the head of the Dana-Farber and presented the money and said, you should help support this, and they just sort of laughed at him. But it's gradually increased, so that every year they raise more and more money. And it's the largest athletic fundraiser in the world, I believe, certainly in the US. And last year we raised, I think, over $40 million. I've done it, I think, 12 times. And it starts in Sturbridge or Wellesley and goes to Provincetown. And they have about 5,000 or 6,000 riders each summer to raise money for cancer research.
And you specifically ride on a team with the Children's Hospital?
Yeah, it's called Pedals for Pediatrics, and to raise money for pediatric cancer research. It's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of nice people along the way, and it's a good way to get in shape and do something good.
Definitely. So while you are mostly staying at home, what have you been doing differently now besides playing music? Playing music other than what you normally have to practice for the orchestra? What have you been doing to stay busy and active?
Well, there've been no problem staying busy. I mean, my days are at least as long, if not longer, than normal. And in some ways more tense and anxiety producing. It's actually more stressful, I think, this work, because it's so unusual. But to try to get some exercise and relax, we've been going on walks and some bike rides and things like that.
So before I let you go, are there any other final thoughts or pieces of advice, anything you want to leave us with?
Everybody, I hope, will stay healthy and social distance and wear your mask outside and be safe. I think I've been impressed with a lot of the things I've seen online that musicians have done. It's like our doctors. It's hard to keep them down for very long, and they will find ways to express themselves. Our docs are doing novel ways of taking care of patients, whether it's remotely or coming in even at their own risk. But musicians are doing the same thing, and there's been a lot of examples. The classic one was the Rotterdam Symphony Orchestra that early on put out that piece that was really incredible and inspiring, and there's been a lot since. So I think this is a time for music to help us as we get through this stressful time, and we'll get through it. And life may never go back to exactly what it was before, but it seems like the human race is pretty adaptable, so we'll get by.
So to wrap up, you will play a little something for us, right?
It's the Adagio movement of the Clarinet Concerto. So one of the things I decided to do is sort of dust that off. I hadn't played it in a long time. The Adagio movement I've played a lot. The first and third movements have some technical challenges that it's a nice way to work on technique and still play beautiful music. It's probably one of the most incredible concertos for any instrument, I think, that there is. I used to think that Mozart, it was written near the end of his life, as was the Clarinet Quintet, and I think even the Kegelstadt, I'm not sure, the trio. And so I sort of joked that it took him most of his career before he was mature enough to write for the clarinet, and he did a great job, as did Brahms, so it was similar. But it's just a favorite piece of mine. It's a little challenging to play with music -1, and the orchestra isn't as good as Longwood in the background, and it's harder when you don't have Ronnie as a conductor to tell you when to come in, and you sort of have to guess. So it's not perfect, but it's a beautiful piece, and I hope you like it.